What's going on, guys? Danny here from Metal Couch, and today we're going to be talking about a thrash album, specifically technical thrash, early tech thrash. Tech thrash being a genre that I don't normally touch upon, and that would be Toxik's Think This. Now, Think This was suggested to me by a friend of the show, Vince, to listen to, because he's like, hey, you haven't reviewed much tech thrash lately, and you need to take a break from black metal, and this Bolt Thrower was a huge ordeal, all that war metal. Take a break. Dive into the 80s and get yourself some nice political tech thrash metal. Now, right off the bat, one thing that I want to comment on with Think This is this album art. This album art looks awesome. Right off the bat, when he showed me, when he pulled this album up on his music player, and I saw this album cover, I'm immediately thinking that this has to be a thrash album. Look at that cover. It is so stereotypically thrash that it's just awesome. But moving on, getting into the music itself, we open with the title track, Think This. Right off the bat, and not what I was expecting. You can find in the production very audible bass, which in my opinion is a very good thing. I always enjoy it whenever you can audibly hear the bass guitar driving, and it doesn't necessarily do what a lot of thrash albums do, and that's just emulate the rhythm line for the for guitar tracks. This decides to do things different, and I could tell that listening to this opening track that this was a little bit more on the progressive side, thus making it tech thrash. And one thing that threw me off at the beginning was the vocalist. He has this vocal filter on him at the beginning of Think This, which is quickly ditched, and I was like, oh no, I hope the whole album does not have that ridiculous filter on it. However, he does this throughout the album. You have this little trick, which was very prominent in the 80s and early 90s. You would find it on Guns N' Roses, Mustaine on Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. That track in particular used the same trick, and that's layering the vocals with a head voice, and I guess you could consider it like a chest voice, kind of like you have a standard singing voice with the high-pitched falsetto going at the same time. This is a vocal style that I don't necessarily mind too much, not to say that it's bad or anything like that. When used properly, like found on this album, it works great. And I have to really commend this vocalist, because it sounds to me like when he's hitting those high notes, sometimes when you listen to albums where you have metal vocalists that are trying to hit those high notes, and sometimes they struggle, this guy seems to have almost no effort put into it whatsoever. Like, he's just able to do it. And to me, that's a huge plus. Awesome. In terms of the vocal production, great. When it comes to guitar instrumentation, this is early tech thrash. It's going to be progressive. It's going to be difficult for people like me who listen to this and like, man, I don't think I could ever play that in the history of ever. This album, production-wise for the guitars, sounds awesome. Great for the period. 1989, I believe, is when this album came out. Awesome. But going down the track listing, I've already covered Think This. Great way to open the album. We get Greed, which opens up with a sample from a fantastic movie I recommend watching, Wall Street. Wall Street's a pretty good movie, and it opens up with good old Michael Douglas as Gordon Gekko, and Greed is good. That really caught me by surprise. I'm like, wow, I didn't really expect something like that to be in here. Spontaneous. Now, Spontaneous was the song that set up a flag saying, I know exactly where these guys are from. And what I mean by that is, if you listen to 80s thrash, it's either from the West Coast or the East Coast. And I could tell by how the gang vocals are done, or the backing vocals, whatever you want to call it, I could immediately tell that this was East Coast thrash, and I wanted to verify, and these guys are from the East Coast. But that's one of those little subtle things that some people wouldn't necessarily catch on to, but that song is so East Coast thrash, and And I had a little sparkle in my eye when I was just like, wow, these guys might be from New York or New Jersey or something. Fourth track on the album, There Stood the Fence, again, completely took me off guard with the fact that this is primarily a ballad. Now, a ballad on a tech thrash album is incredibly out of place. However, the vocalist really shines here. He does a very good job on this, and the acoustic guitar production's very good for the time. I was pleasantly surprised, as I usually don't enjoy ballads in almost any way, shape, or form. I think ballads are what ruined a lot of metal bands in the 80s. This isn't necessarily the case with this song. This is one of the rare occasions that you'll hear me talk about a ballad and actually get some semblance of enjoyment out of it. So, really surprised with There Stood the Fence. Then we get Black and White, which has a very strange sounding chorus. Him holding a black and white. It was very weird for me, making the song unique and making it one of my favorites off of this album. And then we have Technical Arrogance. Technical Arrogance is pretty much exactly how it sounds. Odd time signatures, guitar sections that are very complex. That's pretty much what sums up that track in particular. Not necessarily my favorite, but you know what you're getting yourself into by just reading that title. Now, the next one, I don't know how to pronounce the first half of the title, because it's just a random sequence of letters, in my opinion. I don't really know what that's supposed to be. But then you have a little slash in God. Now, this is where you start to get the stereotypical subject matter of a thrash metal album in the 80s. This album is very political in nature. It is anti-Reagan. It is anti... Was Bush elected at this point? Bush was elected at this point, I believe. Yeah. It's very political in nature. And you can tell that these guys were not exactly a fan of the Republican Party in this album. And In God is one of those, In God We Trust, things like that, talking about the United States. Moving on. Machine Dream, probably the most technical when it comes to the guitar lines on this album. I couldn't for the life of me even try to play this song. If I even tried, it would just be impossible. And when moving on, we get out of the blue, we just get a cover of Out on the Tiles by Led Zeppelin. And oddly enough, this is not the first thrash band that I've heard cover this particular song. It's actually a Led Zeppelin song that's covered a lot by metal bands. Not exactly sure why. I mean, original songs, in my opinion, this is a good song, and their version of it is definitely no slouch. It's great to listen to, but you really, in only a few sections, you can really tell that it's a Led Zeppelin song. They make it their own, and I think that's how covers should be. So, it was a good cover. Rather enjoyed it. Shotgun Logic. At this point, the album's starting to wind down, and you can definitely tell with Shotgun Logic. I wasn't necessarily too enthralled by this particular track, but decent nonetheless. Time After Time, which is the last full song that we get on the album, is a fantastic closer to this album. Solo work, thrift work, amazing. And then we get a 27-second, little flipping through news report kind of thing with Think That to close out the album. This album clocks in at about 53 and a half minutes, almost an hour here, so it's a pretty long listen. But is it worth it? My opinion, yes. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this album, and probably why it's going to be labeled as a classic album in my opinion, is just that. Listening to this album, it's sort of an underrated album from the 80s. I've never heard anybody talk about Toxik, save for a friend of the show, Vince, introduced it to me. And frankly, with only 2 albums under their belt, and after doing some Google searches, there's rumored to be maybe a 3rd album in the works sometime. I'm kind of curious to see if they can muster enough material to make a 3rd album in 2015 or 2016 or whenever it gets put out. Also, if you were to review the Metal Archives page, there was supposed to be a kind of a documentary or concert sort of deal. Not exactly sure what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be out in 07, 08. Trailer was put out, but never quite got off the ground. I would like to see more material from this band. I haven't listened to their first album, World Circus, but after this, they just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth, bringing in the band back together to play a few shows every once in a while, do some festivals, but other than that, not much activity from these guys, and it's a damn shame because this album is fucking fantastic. I highly recommend listening to this album. It is a must-listen if you are into tech thrash. Early tech thrash with awesome vocals, awesome guitar lines, bass that doesn't emulate rhythm lines, and subject matter that just screams 80s thrash. Think this? Fantastic album. Give it a grade out of 10. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. This is a damn near perfect album. I honestly feel like that if it was... I don't really know how to make this album better, but something about it doesn't make it quite perfect, but it's still a damn good album nonetheless. Highly recommend listening to this one, guys. Get a chance to, if you miraculously find a physical copy of this, for the love of God, buy it. It's worth it. I want to find a physical copy of it because this is a damn good album. 9.5 out of 10 for me. Danny here from Metal Couch, signing out.